game over, man. It's game over.
Like when we were having.
You always drank it at my house.
Exactly. Yeah.
Even when you were up in Shasta, they didn't have Shasta soda. I thought that's all they drank there.
No. Contrary to popular belief, they drink other stuff.
I thought the lake was Shasta
It's
soda.
mostly meth.
Drink it?
They drink it. They should have drank
Liquid meth. That's a thing, though. I watched that. There is a documentary about I forgot what it was. It's on Netflix about some drug labs people that were like one chick was like started using it, and the first thing she started using was liquid meth they had there.
Well, it's like
She had to drop it big bloop on her tongue.
it's like rule 34, except it's rule 42. Anything that can exist exists.
Oh, okay.
So liquid meth exists.
Well, on that note, hello and welcome to Nerd Fights. On our first episode last time, Kevin had some questions for Jay and myself about surviving the apocalypse. This time, I'm going to have some questions for Jay and Kevin about my favorite superhero and supervillain, Spider-Man and Venom. So first, let's go ahead and introduce our panel here.
Bobby, you're in the panel.
Introduce us. Go ahead.
I figured you could do it yourself because you're adults. But first, we got Jay here. Nope, Kevin, you go
Age
second.
before beauty.
We got Jay here, and then we've got Kevin. This time he gets to bend to my will, as he cost me the win last time, so we'll see if I'm generous or not this time.
Well, this is an odd place to be on this side of the mic. Doesn't make sense because I'm still on the same side of the mic. But
You're in the same exact place you were
Oh, you
every
gotta
other
turn
time.
around. Sit at your desk, face away from your laptop.
it does feel a little bit different now, being in a position of weakness, because Bobby is a brutal leader.
Kevin's not
I
used to being
rule
vulnerable.
with an iron fist, so
Yes.
just mind yourself when you're giving your answers.
Cool.
Hand-fisted, not iron-fisted.
I rule with a ham fist. There you go. That's perfect.
Give me all the ham.
I actually rule with a bacon fist because bacon is a much better version of ham.
It's not even
So-
the same thing at all.
It is. Trust me. I
It's
know.
like
I just
I know.
lost this debate, I think.
It's like saying ground beef is the same as filet mignon. It's not. It's the same animal, but it's not the same.
All right. So I've got 3 questions here. So this is obviously going to be a best of 3. Let's start off with our first one. How would you fix/improve the first Venom movie? So let's start off with Kevin.
All right, this is in my opinion, a very easy choice. I suspect that the only reason I got to choose this is because Jay submitted his answer after me. But the only real answer to this is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the only way you can improve that movie, because Venom is, like, as a character, is so closely tied. His origin, his DNA is connected to Spider-Man in every single way. Throughout the comic book history, I'm sure most of the people know about it, but alien sludge basically comes from another planet, lands on Earth, and immediately attaches itself to Spider-Man's suit. Peter Parker is unaware of where the suit came from, but he likes the way it feels when he puts it on, and that's when he has the black suit for like over a year in the comics. Over time, he starts to eventually get corrupted by this black suit, and he realizes that that's the case, and he's able to shed it from him and get back to his normal self. What ends up happening after that is the black sludge, the symbiote, which is, its name is actually Venom, falls on Eddie Brock, and then that's how we have basically the most common or the most popular Venom throughout the comics. As a result of that, as his character develops, he basically wants to be Spider-Man. That's all he wants to do, is become Spider-Man. He wants to basically get the spotlight for being some sort of hero. He doesn't end up doing it the right way a lot of the times, but that's basically his motivation. So if you have a Venom story developed that way, make him more of an anti-hero instead of just a guy, based on his want to be Spider-Man, much better motivation for the character in the movie. Whereas now it's just kind of, it puts it all on Eddie Brock as a character, and Eddie Brock isn't that deep, especially in the movies. So I think that having Spider-Man in there as a character would improve it greatly.
Well, I got to ask you one question. Why, or what is not deep about a social commentary vlogger?
Okay, Jay, what's your choice?
Yes, Jay, what is your choice?
Well, my choice is, like, it lives in the little more reality here. You know, we can't go back and change the past and have, Sony and MCU get along so they can actually do that. Maybe some kind of mention or hint at Spider-Man would be cool. But my choice would be, I think if we kind of I feel like we're being stuck with this kind of version of Venom, and so if we were to go back and maybe like if there's an extended cut or something like that, but I feel like there's a lot of useless things in this movie. Like almost like the villain is pretty weak. The villain's pretty weak. I mean, he's just another symbiote, which would be cool on a stronger villain. But like Michelle Williams' character is pretty much pointless and kind of just a waste of time. And I think they just try to focus too much on humor in this one, and it's just a lot of awkward stuff that happens. Then they need to just get rid of it. I feel like Tom Hardy was a pretty good Eddie Brock, but I feel like they should have done him more of like a narcissistic kind of Eddie Brock, like the original Eddie Brock we got. Narcissistic and a little jealous. And if something did happen, like say he was back in New York and Spider-Man did screw him over and he's banished out to San Francisco where he is, and maybe he learned some lessons that way, but it's still going to have those tendencies to be out for himself. And like I think I've said before in the past about Venom, like they don't really show the duality of I think he gives into more of Venom's tendencies as Eddie Brock than he does in the movie, and I think that's something they should go back and do. So, like I said, just they need to delete Michelle Williams. I don't think being integrated in the MCU at this point is an option. So I think if they can work with what they have, and then bring in a stronger villain. I'm not sure who they might have been. I mean, you couldn't be someone that's in the Spider-Verse already because all belongs to MCU. So I don't know. Maybe that's a tough one for me, who the villain would be. But elaborate on the scientist guy, the mad scientist, I guess. But just get a stronger actor, maybe someone who is more of a presence.
Well, oh, sorry, Kevin, go.
I was just gonna say, from my point of view, basically, with my version of the story, Venom would basically be the villain of the movie, which is sort of what a lot of people were expecting when they first announced it, for the most part, and a lot of people weren't sure how they would do it. Now that like Joker exists, for example, we can see a villain-centric movie, and in hindsight, obviously that's all we can look at this in, but in hindsight, having a Spider-Man be sort of the reverse of the coin with Venom, where they're basically at odds, and then once the movie ends, then maybe you start to show a transition to him more wanting to be Spider-Man rather than him trying to kill Spider-Man. So you could sort of have that as his character arc. You can have Eddie Brock starting to gain more control over the character, over the symbiote, versus and that's sort of what makes Venom interesting, is that him and Eddie Brock have an actual symbiotic relationship in terms of how they refer to themselves. They call each other we, they say us, all this stuff. Whereas versus Carnage as a character, Carnage is in so much more control over Cletus Cassidy that he just has he's me and I. So that's sort of how you can show that development of the character throughout the movie with Spider-Man as the hero, but not necessarily told from his point of view. And like you said about the whole studio thing, in the spirit of the question, I thought it was anything we wanted, any way to improve the movie. That's kind of why I picked that. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up.
In a perfect world is kind of how I'm asking it. But Kevin, so would you fundamentally change the character that we saw in the Venom movie to be more like the comics, like Eddie Brock?
No, because I actually did like Ed Hardy's. I like Tom Hardy's
his tattoos.
I like Tom Hardy's performance as the character, and I think that sort of neurotic, like the reporting aspect of his character was never really anything that was that it wasn't delved into that much in the movie, so they could expand on that if they wanted to. But in terms of his like neurotic banter with the symbiote, I liked all that stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily change any of his backstory. Just sort of show the journey a little bit differently.
So would he still be like a social justice kind of like reporter or like vlogger type thing, like he was in Venom?
Sure, why not? It doesn't. I don't think it affects the story too much, because it's all about his relationship with the symbiote itself, not necessarily about what he does for a living, or even his fall from grace wasn't necessarily integral to the story. So I don't know. I don't think any of that stuff really matters. It just matters if they were going to do it exactly like the comics, they would have to have him working at the Daily Bugle and have Peter Parker out him as a liar or whatever, and then ruin his life that way. But the social justice warrior guy, whatever, it doesn't really change much in my opinion.
Okay, Jay. So let's say you just take out Michelle Williams and all that storyline, what would you replace it with?
That's a good question. Well, I mean, he could have a love interest, but I mean, it just seemed weird to have Michelle Williams take on the symbiote in the movie, and their relationship was just so dysfunctional. I mean, the way he steals, I guess, her information on the laptop just seemed out of character for who he is in this movie. I mean, as you lead up to like a social justice warrior, I guess, but I mean, to actually betray the person he loves seems kind of like out of character for him, even though he is an investigative journalist and he'd do anything at the story. I mean, I think he would have thought more about the effect on his relationship with him, with Michelle Williams, and it just seemed like, I said, it seemed out of character for that character. If we had gotten more of a narcissistic Eddie Brock, then maybe, and then that was the point where things got difficult between them because he does steal the information from her. Then maybe she wouldn't have been as useless in the movie. So I mean, yeah, that's my answer on there.
But what if basically what ends up happening is you have Spider-Man, Peter Parker outing Tom Hardy's or Eddie Brock for stealing that information from his girlfriend. So that is how you start the whole hatred between Eddie Brock and Peter Parker. At that point, is Peter Parker's basically a rat because he's a good guy, but he also has the you know what, that kind of brings up an interesting question because Peter Parker would have to have the suit at that point. So basically Peter Parker is acting like an asshole. He rats out Eddie Brock for stealing that information to get a story because they're
perfect
competing
for the Black Suit Spider-Man era. Yeah,
exactly. So then at that point, this is all going to have to be very quick at the beginning of the movie. But basically, you have Spider-Man getting rid of the suit after that, and landing on Eddie Brock, and he's already steaming from the fact that he lost his girlfriend, lost his job based on stealing that information for the case that he inevitably is going to want to break because that's what he is. It's all about the story. So I think that'd be an interesting rewrite to the beginning of the movie. Having Spider-Man in there makes it way more closely related to the Venom source material that we've spent 40 years with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So I got a question for both of you here. I guess we'll start with Jay. So what is the biggest problem with adding Spider-Man to Venom 1? Like, what do you see as the biggest problem with that?
Kevin, you want to go? I'll
Yes,
go.
you.
Okay. I thought you said for both of us. Oh,
No,
you said
sorry,
Jay.
Jay
You
first.
just say Jay. Okay. The biggest problem.
I know this could
I think
be
I
it's
don't
really
know
tough
how I
question.
would even answer that question. It's my choice. You know what, Kevin? Your answer sucks. Spider-Man
Be
would not
honest,
work.
Kevin.
I think Spider-Man. I mean, maybe stealing some of the thunder from Venom, steal the spotlight away from him. I don't know how much he's going to be in the movie, but you'd think people would go to watch it and be cheering for Spider-Man instead of, being invested in Venom. I think that would kind of like steal the spotlight, steal his thunder.
I think that is unfortunately inevitable, having Spider-Man be in the movie being a point of interest, but him being basically presented as the villain of the movie, even though we all know that he's a hero, but showing it from Venom's point of view as Spider-Man being the bad guy. Eddie Brock and Venom have been slighted in some way. They're looking for revenge. It would be an interesting take on that whole relationship. One of the things, there's a comic called Lex Luthor that came out, I think, in the early 2000s, where it's all told from Lex Luthor's point of view, and Superman is portrayed as the villain of the story, and it's really cool. It's really interesting. So seeing a movie version of that would elevate this character. It would be really interesting to see, because
That would be a
have
ballsy move.
at this point we have 7 freaking Spider-Man movies. So
Yeah, there's way too many right now.
Let's see one that's a little bit different, make him more of the bad guy, and then eventually, down the road, when you have multiple sequels to Venom, they can start to sort of change the scales, because Venom's becoming more of an anti-hero, less of a villain himself, and all that stuff. So it'd be definitely an interesting road.
All right. So, with all that said, Kevin, what is the worst, or what are the problems that come from what Jay wants to do with the fixes?
So specifically, Jay, you want to make Michelle Williams out of the movie and him more
Change
narcissistic?
Sorry, what was that again? Make him more narcissistic?
Yeah.
I want to make him more like the original Eddie Brock as far as character goes.
Like more of a tough guy type?
More of a tough guy. More like I feel like he's narcissistic. He's out for himself. You know, he wants to be on top. Everything's for him. Him. He's a little more selfish. Michelle Williams, I mean, didn't necessarily have to delete her from the movie, but I feel like she was relied. She was important. She was relied on a little too much in this movie as far as the story develops and moves on. She doesn't need to be a part of the symbiote. That was, I mean, it was kind of cool to see a lady Venom, but it was just kind of unnecessary.
Yeah.
It was just kind of tacked on. It was really just like, oh, okay, we're gonna go there now. Everything's gonna be the dog's gonna be a Venom. You know, everyone's gonna be a Venom.
Yeah. There's gonna be a Venomverse coming up in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. Jeez, that'd be awful. I will say though that besides that, because I was actually going to bring that up too, is the fact that when she wore the symbiote, when she was wearing Venom, felt like it was shoehorned in. But besides that, I think that in my version of the movie, having Spider-Man be the one who rats out Eddie Brock for stealing that information, I think it just adds to the heartache and the despair and the anger that he has. So I think having a love interest is necessary. Maybe having it expanded as much as it was for what we got was maybe too much. But on top of that, I think that having Eddie Brock be more like the comics, he'd be a little bit too one note, stereotypical bully type. I think that having him have sort of a conscience and a heart makes the struggle with the symbiote suit a lot more impactful, because basically he's a guy who has a heart and compassion. He wants to expose all these people that are taking advantage of the little guy. That's his whole motivation for being a reporter. But like his strength and his virtue sort of negates the symbiote's corruption, and that's why he's able to hold on to the we and us and his own identity, and that they're working together, not that he's completely controlled. So like I said, having a more of a narcissist tough guy, it's just a little bit one note, a little bit bland. So this would just add a little bit more of an internal conflict, basically, instead of him just giving in and submitting to that their quote unquote symbiotic relationship.
Okay, a lot of good arguments here. As you guys know, Venom is my favorite villain, and I was super excited for this movie, and then I was super upset about how they actually pulled off this movie. My two biggest changes of this movie would be to both add Spider-Man and to make Eddie Brock more of the comic version. So, like, you guys both picked on the two things that are most important to me with the Venom movie. I think, as Kevin was talking about, adding Spider-Man in, even if it's just at the beginning, just to show how Venom came to be, that makes a lot more sense than it just coming to Earth and being sort of like an alien that's sort of like Spider-Man. It doesn't really make a lot of sense how it's very similar to Spider-Man without the Spider-Man influence. But then, going with Jay's stuff, I think seeing a more narcissistic Eddie Brock would be a huge plus. Like, one thing I would have liked to have heard more from Jay is talking about like how he could have been that narcissistic guy, and he could have been more of a villain in his own movie, and then by the end of the movie he realized what he should be doing, and leading into sequels. So I would have liked to have heard that a little bit more.
Yeah.
I just think based on everything we heard here, I think I'm going to have to go with Kevin's choice with adding Spider-Man here, just because I think he made a great point. That's how the character came to be, and it's like changing that fundamental thing about him it was just crazy to me, and we saw it in the movie not work very well. But I think you put up a very good fight there, Jay. So don't feel too bad about that.
I don't feel bad.
Thank God I picked Spider-Man, because I almost picked Topher Grace.
Oh no.
Oh, Topher Grace. Don't remind me. Why has Venom and Doctor Doom have had such a bad go in movies so far, and I just want, that's 5 opportunities for those two characters. Those are my two favorite villains, and they have just been crapped on completely so far. So here's hoping that Venom 2: Let There Be Carnage is actually good.
Yeah.
But going into the next question, now we're going more towards Spider-Man. I asked, which villain would you want as the third Spider-Man MCU villain? So let's start off with Jay here.
Okay. I know he's been done in the first Spider-Man, but I feel along the lines of maybe just him completely is Norman Osborn just as himself at first, and maybe towards the end of the movie he becomes Green Goblin. So maybe he's just kind of this rich guy who acts like he's a philanthropist, but he's really he's just evil conglomerate, head of a conglomerate out trying to get power. And he's just doing everything he can to hinder and disrupt what Spider-Man's doing. And then through that, maybe we can go on to some way along the lines of into the Dark Avengers or something like that afterwards, where he's in charge of that, or another Green Goblin or iteration of Green Goblin would be pretty cool. Because I I feel like Green Goblin is the best Spider-Man villain. He's just something about him. It's just almost his like exact opposite, like a nemesis. Obviously his nemesis would have been Venom, but as far as pure villain, pure evil goes, Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, is the guy. And he's got the money and he's got everything behind him. He's the evil Batman, kind of, So
that's cool.
Yeah,
you can almost say like the evil Tony Stark.
Yeah, which he pretty much becomes evil Tony Stark after
he's the evil 2-bit Tony Stark.
Well, he takes on as Iron Patriot. He takes on that role, doesn't he? For Dark Avengers.
He stole the suit.
Yeah, he stole the suit.
And he doesn't know how to make the reactor tech, so it's like this weaker garbage tech. So the suit's worthless, basically. It's all just a symbol.
But then, it's like you go into the next stage of Marvel, and you can have, him, and you can have, Thunder Ross as, the Red Hulk or something like that. That'd be kind of cool.
Okay. All right, Kevin, what about you?
So, I actually like Jay's choice, and I think that my actual choice is going to have sort of the catalyst, and that may actually be Jay's choice. But interestingly enough, I thought it was going to be hilarious to pick for this one Venom, because having Spider-Man for answer 1 and then Venom for answer 2, that was going to be my initial choice, and it would have been
that would have been funny. I would have liked to have heard it.
Yeah. But based on the way that Far From Home ended, I think that this would be a more natural choice than Venom, because introducing Venom at the beginning of the movie would be, I think it would end up having to be a little rushed. So I actually picked Kraven the Hunter. So, and what I meant by having Jay's choice and Norman Osborn sort of be involved in this a little bit, I think that, so at the end of Spider-Man Far From Home, spoiler alert, Spider-Man's outed as Peter Parker. The whole world's going to be looking for him. So who's the best guy to find him besides Kraven? So I was initially thinking that maybe J. Jonah Jameson would be sort of like a money man for like hiring Kraven to track Peter Parker down, but it just doesn't really seem like his type. He's more of a mouth, not really that type of guy.
Just like he's done that. He actually helped create, at least in the 1994 Spider-Man show, he helped create Scorpion. Like he picked the guy and he helped fund the project to get him turned into Scorpion. Just FYI.
Oh, okay. Well, that'd be interesting. I'm not sure it would work that well in movie sense, just because of the history we have with the actor, who I'm drawing a blank on his name right now.
J.K. Simmons?
Yeah, J.K. Simmons. But anyways, so you have Kraven, who's hired, maybe by Norman Osborn, maybe J. Jonah Jameson. But Osborn, I think, would be a more natural choice, because then it would set up the future. But because we've seen Green Goblin multiple times now, let's see somebody a little bit different, somebody who's capable of tracking Peter down and has been one of the most formidable opponents to Peter Parker, Spider-Man, because he is such a skilled hunter. His talents are incredible, and he can track anybody down. He's gotten really close to actually killing Spider-Man on multiple occasions in the comics. So essentially my choice being based on a fresh villain that we've never seen before, not a lot of people really know too much about him, and his skill set would be an awesome foil for Spider-Man. So yeah, Kraven the Hunter.
Those are, I think those are two great choices, because we've never seen Kraven except for in the comics and the video game, or like some of the video games, and I think it would be amazing to see him on screen. And then of course, Norman Osborn, even though we've seen the Green Goblin, technically we've seen a form of the Green Goblin like 3 times now. I think that's a tremendous character, and he could, like, he is the biggest foe for Spider-Man, so it would be amazing to see both of those guys on screen. But I guess what I would want to know is, like, how would you put them, like, just the how Far From Home ended? What would you, Jay? What would you do with Norman Osborn to put him in the universe in the next movie?
To put him in the universe,
Yeah.
I would say maybe as far along the lines of Mysterio, maybe there were some connections to Oscorp in there, and then maybe the person behind it all along was Norman Osborn. And so, like I said, this movie, like in this, he basically most of the time just be himself, not technically the Green Goblin. I mean, obviously some things at the end of the movie would probably lead to his inception and creation of the Green Goblin, but you just see him as being the money man, the person pulling the strings behind the scenes, and doing everything he can to eliminate Spider-Man. And now that he knows that it's Peter Parker, he's got an extra tool on his belt that he can use, that knowledge. And so it just makes it even harder for him. Go after Aunt May and you go after his friends from school, and you go after MJ. And I just think like that's almost sometimes it's more menacing, because I mean you have Lex Luthor in DC. I mean they're almost the same character, but Lex Luthor is much more I feel like conniving and more involved, and I think Osborn needs that kind of presence, I think, in this universe, which we didn't really see in the first couple Spider-Mans. We just saw him trying to protect himself and save himself, and then him becoming the Green Goblin and going insane, and wanting to kill Spider-Man. But you don't really see his motives behind it. So I think they need to have some kind of motive behind there.
I think we can all agree that the depiction in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 should never be done again.
No.
That was horrendous.
That was a great love story. For some reason, that's a great rom-com. And if they had just done a rom-com with Spider-Man in it, that would have been interesting. But making it a superhero movie really ruined it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, too, and it was the Harry Osborn, so it was like, it wasn't really the original Green Goblin.
We should eventually do a review of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because it's awful and I could talk forever about it.
I haven't watched it since theaters.
Wow. So, Jay, I do have one issue with your choice, what you were saying about maybe Mysterio's connected to Oscorp in some way. I think that sort of negates his character motivation in the last movie because he was all about taking Stark down because he worked at Stark Industries, and it was all just revenge based on how Stark had treated people in his past. So having it be like, oh, and by the way, he also worked with Oscorp or worked for Oscorp would be a little strange. So,
well, my thing would be is how's he financing all this stuff to go against a Stark after they've lost their jobs, what are they doing? How are they doing that? Yeah,
it was a criminal enterprise with a bunch of different players. They had that whole group. We unfortunately didn't see their bank account, but
yeah, but I mean that the person behind that could have been Osborn.
It could have been.
The funding could have been funding them because obviously he's got a whole corporation competing probably with Stark Industries. So I mean that would be another motivation for him too. So.
True. I'm just not a huge fan of retconning. So like stuff that we already know being like changed retroactively would be a little clunky in my opinion. But again, I'm not saying that Osborn shouldn't be in this movie because I would basically want him to be the financier of my villain, but just as a background character, basically him saying, "Oh, I'm here. By the way, I'm here in the shadows." But Kraven's going to be the main star. He's going to be the driver of the story because Peter Parker is going to be running from him the whole time. So you also said that that Osborn might not necessarily be the Green Goblin. I think you need to have more of a supervillain type presence in the story for it to really work. Because what's going to happen is Peter Parker going to be running from the actual Norman Osborn the whole time? Because Peter Parker is going to have to go into hiding. His identity's been released. So having a non-Green Goblin Norman Osborn would be a little strange unless it's just like a replay of Venom where you have all these goons that are chasing him down with these dumbass drones. And I don't think we need to see that again either. But those are my only complaints with Norman Osborn as a character in the way that the series has been presented so far. Although I really do want Osborn in future movies. It's just that the way that you would want to introduce him would be a little bit weird, in my opinion.
Jay, what are your problems with having Kraven as the villain of the next movie?
I don't know. I mean, Kraven, he's a pretty cool character, but I think like right now, I don't know. I'm gonna go on the social justice warrior kind of thing going on right now. I just don't think 100 is gonna be perceived very, very well in this modern times. Someone's gonna be like, well, why is this? I mean, obviously, he will be the villain apparently, but
what if he's Native American?
Well, if he's Native American, he's not wearing a lion's head around his neck, you know.
He might. They don't waste anything.
Native American going to hunt lions. Yeah,
It's just a
thanks
mane.
so much. It's just a mane. But
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
can live without their mane, right?
I gotta do the low blow with that. But I mean, and then I don't know how many people who haven't read the comics are gonna understand who Kraven was. I mean, if I would maybe replace him with the Punisher if they brought something in the movie. The Punisher, I think, would probably have been a more relatable, more recognizable choice, and probably would have gotten people more excited about this villain.
I think
him being.
I think you would have the opposite problem in that case, though, because he's so recognizable now as the character that he is. Even though in the comics, there's a lot of history there with the Punisher hunting down Spider-Man, but we already know that the Punisher has more altruistic motivations. So it would be a little bit weird to have him. If in order to do that for the third Spider-Man movie, you'd have to have another villain anyways, because they would do the same thing where it's like, oh, there's a misunderstanding because they're hunting each other or whatever, and then the Punisher would end up turn.
Yeah, feeding the Punisher that information.
Okay, well that would definitely work, but then your villain's the Punisher, and it's not Norman Osborn.
No, but the Punisher's not a villain then. It's still Norman Osborn.
No, you're undercutting your own argument, goddammit.
So is this like a BVS thing, like where they fight and then they realize
exactly?
Which I don't want that to happen. That ruined Batman vs Superman. Well, many things did, but that's one of my biggest complaints is having Doomsday at all. So basically, you're going to have a similar setup where the Punisher is going to end up like being like, "Oh wait, you're not the villain. Wait, your mom's name is Martha," and then they got to fight Norman Osborn as Green Goblin for some reason. So I don't know. It'd be strange.
My next question is, which one of you is going to have the Rhino as the villain of the fourth Spider-Man movie set up in this movie?
Is it just the Rhino?
Yeah, it's
No
I'm
Sinister
the
Six?
Rhino. It's
Jay,
Paul Giamatti Rhino.
Jay, I'll let you have that one, and maybe he worked for Stark Industries back during Iron Man 2. No, he worked for Hammer Tech.
Hammer Tech.
My last question: what is the tone of each one of your movies?
I guess I'll go first. It would be in line with how we've seen it portrayed so far. It would be, Peter Parker's going to be his quippy self. He's going to be a young kid who's, in a situation that he's never been before. I think Kraven could be a little bit darker of a villain. Mysterio sort of did get a little bit dark towards the end of the movie where he almost shoots Peter in the head, spoiler alert. But so Kraven could have a very similar tone where he's going to have the upper hand because he's got years and years and years and years of experience of tracking down elusive creatures that can kill him if they wanted to, because he's smart and he's cunning. So it could have a little bit of a darker tone in that case, but I think you have to keep it in line with what we've seen already. But Peter Parker may just be a little bit more in the deep end than we've seen before. So yeah, I think you got to keep it how it's been so far. What we've seen in the movies so far. Even the extended stuff. It's very like in Civil War. It's a dark storyline essentially. But Peter Parker comes in and he's like a bright light. He's hope. So I think you got to keep it similar.
All right. What about you, Jay?
I feel like I don't want to completely copy Cap 2, Winter Soldier, but I feel like that tone of that movie should be something similar to what they have in this one. The world is against Peter now. He's trying to survive. He's got very few friends in this world that are going to believe him. Maybe a couple of the Avengers, but everyone else is against him. The government's against him. His fans they're against him. The people in New York, they're not cheering him anymore, and it kind of just almost drains his I guess not his soul, but like it just brings him down, and maybe he wants to give up at some point along the lines, and then he finds motivation to keep going, or something helps him turn around. It's like someone comes in, like Happy comes in and just gives him the pep talk, or or something, maybe even God forbid something happens to Aunt May or Happy, or someone he loves, just as a catalyst to bring him back and fight for his life and the lives of his loved ones. So just something along the lines of the world's against Peter now. So similar, like I said, to Winter Soldier.
Okay,
that would be interesting.
I mean, like the way that you guys describe both of these potential movies, that's something I would definitely love to see. I think Kraven would be like I was worried about like the tone of the movie, especially when you said that you wanted to be in line with what we've already had. But you did make a good point that Mysterio did get pretty dark at times, like towards the end of the movie. So I think
sorry to interrupt, but in that scene in the parking garage, like when like Peter seeing all the old visions and stuff, and seeing a Tony Stark Iron Man with
zombie.
skeletons. Yeah, like
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you can have those tones of like despair essentially. So, but overall, the movies are based on a very lighthearted kid. So I think you gotta hold that.
I think you made. I think that's a really good move you made with this argument. Is like I said, I was worried about it originally, but then you kind of sold me based on the fact that we have kind of already seen darkness in just the last movie that we watched.
There's not a lot of darkness. I mean, it's just there for a moment.
Darkness.
So I mean, like, I don't know if we keep the same tone. I think just to have this, something to be a complete opposite to mix things up, and then you can go back to that same tone in the next Spider-Man movie. I just feel like it's gonna, like, I feel like the first iterations of Spider-Man, they kind of kept the same tone throughout all the movies, and I think that's maybe was their downfall towards the end, like the Spider-Man 3, obviously, and then Amazing Spider-Man 2. It just kind of felt played. And I feel like, I don't want it to fall victim to that again. And I feel like that's one of the issues from those movies. And I think a nice change of pace, like I said, just something to mix it up, to shock everybody,
Okay, no, I definitely see what you're saying. And it's like, I think Kraven would be a really good villain for like a one-off. Like, I don't see him. I mean, he could eventually join like the Sinister Six potentially down the road. But it's like he's more of in the MCU, he's probably more of a one-off villain. And I think that works perfectly just, for the third movie. But I do love the idea of having Norman Osborn put in. And like Jay said, he doesn't even have to be the Green Goblin in this movie. Just having him as the big bad, like, financial backer who wants to take down Spider-Man and wants to be in control and stuff like that. I think Kevin did put up a decent argument against, like, the Punisher, but I think that would actually be really interesting. It didn't work that well in Batman vs Superman, but I would still like to see it.
So why didn't Jay pick the Punisher?
Because, like I said, the Punisher is the tool used by the villain.
That's exactly it. Norman Osborn he could definitely manipulate somebody like the Punisher into going after Spider-Man for him, even without the Punisher working, for Norman Osborn directly. I think Osborn is that type of overarching villain that he could be there for many, many movies, and then as Jay said, be the Green Goblin towards the end of the movie or in the next movie. I just think as good as Kraven would be, I think going with the tone like Jay said, going more dark, I think that would work better for the third Spider-Man MCU movie. So I would go with the Norman Osborn / Green Goblin pick.
Good luck not having a villain for your movie.
One thing I will say though is I think it would work perfectly if kind of like you alluded to, Kevin, if Craven is the villain working under Norman Osborn.
That's
so
what I was
guys,
at.
So basically I get that point.
So we tied.
So you guys can have
so Jay's quote unquote villain working with a hero is your choice.
Is the Punisher really a hero? He's definitely
an anti-hero.
Anti-hero. He's not a villain. He's in the middle.
All I have to say is, Jay, you should have picked the Punisher. That was apparently the right choice. I'm not salty at all.
Not at all.
No matter how salty I sound.
Of course not.
Sprinkle you on some popcorn.
Ooh.
All right, so last question here. This one's for all the marbles. Okay, so if you could team up Spider-Man in any future MCU movie, who would it be with? And I think we're back to Kevin. Let's go with you.
All right, so I had a very deep... I thought about this for quite a while, actually. I sort of had this existential daydream the other day when you asked this question, and I thought, what would make us see the best of Spider-Man? And the best of Spider-Man, if you guys don't know, is when he had a paper bag on his head and he was wearing a Fantastic Four suit. Bagman is the best of Spider-Man that we've ever seen. So in order to get that, at all costs, we're going to introduce the Fantastic Four into a Spider-Man movie, into the Spider-Man universe and the MCU as a whole. For anybody who doesn't really know, Fantastic Four and Spider-Man had a pretty interesting time together at the beginning of Spider-Man's existence. They were sort of he breaks into the lab because he's like investigating something, and they catch him, and then they end up becoming kind of good friends. And I think that a Spider-Man movie would be the best kind of environment for a Fantastic Four movie, because they're both kind of like fantastical, lighthearted. There's not a lot of like heavy tones with the exception of Galactus, but that could be an Avengers movie down the line. Which also having the Fantastic Four would do you wonders on villains because you can introduce Galactus, you can introduce Annihilus, and more importantly, you can introduce Doctor Doom, which we still have not received a good portrayal of in the 3 movies he's
We're
been in.
only 0 for 3 so far, so it's not that bad.
And they've
When's
gotten
4
worse. They've gotten worse in each one. So I think that it would actually be kind of cool if in Spider-Man 3 they somehow introduce the characters. Because I don't necessarily think we need an origin for them. So you could do sort of like a... who did they do that with in the MCU? Oh, the Spider-Man himself. You can just have them involved in the existing story as some sort of support, just to kind of like ease everybody into the new actors that are going to be playing the characters, and then they could eventually get their own movies, which would have set up the new Avengers threat in Galactus. But basically, this would be an interesting thing because you have Reed Richards and Peter Parker and Tony Stark are some of the smartest people on Earth. Tony Stark's gone, so you need a character like that who's less mystical than Doctor Strange to sort of relate and maybe even be sort of like a mentor surrogate for Peter Parker because he's missing that from Tony Stark being gone. So I think there'd be some interesting stuff there because he was obviously craving it in the last one with Mysterio. He was really open to having that replacement figure for Tony Stark, but you could actually have that for him in a character who is a good guy. So yeah, I think there's a lot you could do with having the Fantastic Four in a Spider-Man movie.
Okay, Jay, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to go with. I hope it's not too obvious of a pick, but in the comics, these guys have an amazing relationship. It's almost a bromance, bro love. It's going to be Deadpool. With New Mutants coming out hopefully later this year, they introduce mutants, and so Deadpool could come in here. I mean, obviously, the goal was him to be part of the MCU. But I feel like it'd be just hilarious to have them meet, and then it starts out as a Spider-Man movie, but then Deadpool breaking their fourth wall tries to take over the movie. It'd be great.
You,
and then
you could make him the villain instead of the
but
Punisher.
he wouldn't be the villain. They'd be best friends. But it turns out like they're teaming up together to do stuff.
Would Norman Osborn be financing him too?
Deadpool doesn't need financing. It is a credit card. So back to where I was. You threw me off.
Sorry.
This is Spider-Man babysitting Deadpool throughout the whole thing, pretty much trying not to get him to kill people. A little more, I guess. They're teaming up, and obviously Spider-Man's not going to be a rated R movie, so it's have to be rated PG-13. So I think it'd be hilarious to like have half of Deadpool's lines just being bleeps, and half of the things he does it's being blurred censor things, and then he pointed out to Peter Parker like, "What the? How come you don't get censored and stuff like that?"
Yeah,
and,
you could be confused about why he's getting censored. I think that'd be nice.
That'd be really good.
And then maybe even somewhere along the lines, Deadpool rubs off on Spider-Man, and somehow Spider-Man can see past the fourth wall, and it breaks too for him too. Something along the lines of that, like Deadpool almost drives him nuts.
Okay, a couple issues. This is an MCU movie, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that that would be really cool to see in a what if story, or in a Spider-Man 7 or 8. But my choice, I think, is better in terms of the future of the MCU as a whole, because you really can set up multiple characters and storylines with the Fantastic Four. The Deadpool cameoing in a movie, in a Spider-Man movie, would be fantastic, but having him as like an actual team up would be strange, to say the least.
But then the thing about the next movie, like he could not be nowhere seen, and they'd be like, "Oh, remember what that guy Deadpool was like?" And people would be like, "I don't know what you're talking about," like it's like all a dream maybe or something like that.
So
Yeah.
Jay, how would you have Deadpool ever actually come back, or would you just have him alluded to?
Oh no, he'd
like
come
a
back.
fever dream?
He'd have to come back. Because I mean they're best friends for such a long time in comics. And that's like I said, it's a bromance. They Deadpool literally is in love with Peter Parker. So I just think I mean, and then that's another great change of pace too. Just go on, kind of be a lines of that's what made Deadpool movies so successful, to have something along the lines where Spider-Man in there too. And just being silly, it'd be fun,
But
so much fun.
I sort of think like in a vacuum, Deadpool is great, and that's sort of why they had like X-Men cameos, but not really like the high end X-Men being involved in the storyline. So like being like, okay, we have this top tier actual, like, we're taking this seriously in Spider-Man. This is a story that we want to tell that actually has some sort of meaning, and then throwing Deadpool into that and just being like a wrench in the gears of the whole movie would be really awkward. And I think
it'd be hilarious.
It would be hilarious, but how many people would be like, "Man, the Deadpool just stole the show from Spider-Man. I thought we were watching a Spider-Man movie."
That's my point. That's why I said he ends up taking over the movie. Like, it's his goal. This is Deadpool's like, this is my movie now.
Well, then that's Deadpool 3 now.
But it's still Spider-Man.
All right, so okay, I got a question for both of you then. Let's start off with Jay. So, how would this movie benefit Deadpool going into the MCU going forward? Like how would this do for Deadpool with his own movies going forward? Would there be any like recurring roles with Spider-Man or anything like that?
Wait, this is a Deadpool movie. We already established that.
No. Sorry, I forgot about that part.
Yeah. It's almost like it's a Will Ferrell movie too.
Man, Jay, you just don't want to win this one, do you? I'm trying to root against Kevin, but now I'm rooting against you.
Clearly, Bobby's impartial.
I'm so partial that I'm impartial.
Okay, so how would Deadpool be incorporated in the rest of the MCU?
Yeah, so how would this benefit Deadpool going forward?
I just think it'd be. I mean, he'd make a lot of good relationships. I mean, obviously, if he's part of, like, he's trying to become part of the Avengers or something like that, and the next thing, or obviously it wouldn't be part of the full movie, but he's introduced to the Avengers through Spider-Man, and then in another Avengers movie, Deadpool shows up and he's like, "I'm here for the tryouts," and I'm like, "There's no tryouts, you idiot!" And he's got like an Avengers shirt on, There's more.
The trainee, he's got an Avengers trainee shirt.
Trainee shirt. It's just a scribbled out X-Men shirt. It says Avengers on it with like duct tape.
That'd be a funny reoccurring joke going from the last movie to this one for Deadpool.
Yeah.
And then he just shows up at a fight, and they're like, "Get out of here, Wade!" And he's just, instead of like trying to help people or trying to not kill everybody, he's just there, doing his stuff. And the Avengers are like, "Come on, man."
All right, Kevin. Same question to you. How would this movie bringing in the Fantastic Four benefit the Fantastic Four going forward?
They'd have movies. This is a no-brainer in my opinion, because they have had the worst treatment. Fox did not know what to do with them. The first movie is okay. The second movie is maybe a little bit better. That's debatable. The third movie is hot garbage. They rushed it through only to keep the name, only to keep the trademark. And then they had to give it back to the MCU anyways because Disney owns the world now. So this would be beneficial to the characters because they'd get a faithful recreation of what they are on the movie screen for the first time ever. And there's people, they're not the biggest characters anymore, but there's people out there who have been clamoring for this for forever, is seeing the Fantastic Four how they want them to, how they want to see them on screen. And the MCU is the most equipped to do this. Disney's the most equipped to make these movies. So that's how it would benefit. They would have, most likely, a secured franchise going forward that not only benefits their own storylines, but also broadens the MCU as a whole for future team-up movies, Avengers movies, etc. So I think that there's no downside. There's no downside.
So my biggest problem with maybe the Fantastic Four is, I mean, I know they've suffered due to lack of good writing and just production, but I'm just thinking maybe the Fantastic Four just doesn't translate well to a movie setting, a live cinema kind of thing going on, and maybe that's I don't know what's going to be different this time from the other 3 times that we've had them, 4 times if you include the one from the 80s.
So I recognize your point, but Doctor Strange was like a D tier character that they brought on screen and faithfully recreated that, and that's a lot of fantastical views or imagery that is shown on screen, and it ended up working very well. So I don't think that's really a problem for Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios to recreate on screen. But just to take a page off of that argument, I think that Deadpool mixed with Spider-Man and the overall MCU would be such a huge tonal shift outside of cameos that it would be very awkward. I think that Deadpool is good in his own world, and because it is his own world, we're in his head basically during these movies. But having that transfer into movies that are like about mostly serious stuff would be so strange. And I'm not a movie writer. I'm not a writer at all. But as an everyman, I would be thrown through a loop seeing that on screen and be like, "What the hell am I watching right now?"
But I bet you'd love it at the end of it.
If this, like I said, if this was like a what if storyline, I'm all for it because you got a half hour of it and it's over with and it doesn't have any effect on the MCU world. That would be beneficial.
Okay, all right. So, I guess I'm just trying to think of one last good question here for you. You guys have covered a lot of ground here with these choices. I guess what is simply the best reason? What is the best reason for these team ups? Kevin, go.
You mean in terms of storyline?
Yeah, just in terms of the movies going like just for that movie and then going forward, whatever you feel like.
Oh well, like I've said multiple times, you can introduce way more broader storylines in terms of villains. For the Avengers franchise and going forward. We already have some of the cosmic stuff with like Captain Marvel and Thor and Guardians, and this would just broaden this into. You could actually piggyback a little bit on the Doctor Strange stuff with multiverse and all that crap. So you can get really into scientific theory and stuff like that going on for the future. But mainly, it's the villains. You got great villains that the Avengers can battle.
That's a good point. Jay, what about you? What's the best reason for Deadpool and Spider-Man teaming up?
Just the antics, I think. It'd just be great to see. But I feel like Kevin thinks this one's going to be the next Spider-Man movie. This could be. Your question was team up in a Spider-Man movie. This could be way down along the lines.
Well, you did say Spider-Man 8.
I did say Spider-Man 8. This may work. This may work when they're out of ideas. So I know what you're trying to do, Jay.
He also brings up the multiverse thing. This could be part of a multiverse. Venom, Deadpool, somehow crosses over in this universe, and he's there temporarily and then gets pushed back. They could bring on the whole Madam Web thing going on, and then somehow maybe Deadpool is best friends with the Spider-Man from another universe, and then he gets pulled over too, or he sneaks across following that Spider-Man. And then he just latches on to Peter Parker as Peter Parker because there's all these Peter Parkers for him to love. So he's got a best friend again. He's got multiple best friends from different universes. So a whole Madam Web kind of Secret Wars thing kind of going on would be.
What is
cool.
Miles Morales chopped liver?
He only likes Peter Parkers.
I really like the answers here. I think. Fantastic Four team up and a Deadpool team up. I love all the answers for all these questions just because I want to see all this stuff with Spider-Man and with Venom. I think it's a lot of really interesting stuff that a lot of it we haven't really seen before. There's a lot of potential there. I think the most fun choice would definitely be Deadpool. Seeing him push Spider-Man's buttons and then seeing Spider-Man try and rein Deadpool in, especially with a PG-13 movie, seeing how funny it might be with him not able to curse and do crazy killings and just wondering why that is. But then with the Fantastic Four, I think Kevin makes a lot of great points with the villains that he'd be able to bring in. I don't really know who Deadpool's villains are, and you didn't really talk about any of them. You have Doctor Doom, you have Galactus, you have I can't remember Kang the Conqueror, I think he said. There's a lot of Annihilus. Sorry, yeah. You have a lot of great villains that the Fantastic Four would bring in. Plus, Spider-Man did have a very good history. I guess both had very good histories together. But I think just going forward, I think Kevin has the better point with the Fantastic Four, and it would just be better for the entire MCU / Spider-Verse with the Fantastic Four. So congratulations to Kevin on moving to 1-0. Jay is second place now at 1-1. And I'm sitting directly in last place at 0-1.
Guess who's winning next week? Because Jay's the judge.
Oh, no.
Oh, Bobby, now that my win has been sealed, thank God you did not ask me how Fantastic Four relates to Spider-Man. Because they do have some history, but, Jay talking about his love for him and all this stuff, I was like, oh, fuck, don't answer me that. Don't ask me that.
It's that, honestly, it was probably a lot, on the scale, it was probably a lot further to Kevin until Jay started talking about that. Then it was probably a 52-48 split by the end there, because Jay did make some very good points about how it would be a more fun movie, but I do think it wouldn't help the universe.
Yeah, it wouldn't fit in the current MCU. I mean, that was my downfall.
Well,
I think that's a great choice.
Bow down to me.
Congratulations, Kevin. You have won your first nerd fight, and we hope to see no more wins going forward. So, Jay,
But
you know what to do next time.
when I was an amateur, I was like, 7-2. So don't forget about those days. Nobody will ever know about those, unfortunately.
Those are in the vault. Maybe we'll release them one day.
Maybe. We did go a little bit long, though. So let's wrap it up, Bobby. Take us out.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you guys enjoyed this Spider-Man and Venom talk. Hopefully we get to see some of these ideas going forward. Knowing
Deadpool.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Knowing how these companies work, we're probably not going to get anything remotely this good, but here's hoping. But thank you very much, and thanks for riding the wave.
Blah. Get pitted.
Shred that nar. We'll see you next time. I'm the champion.
Next time.
I'm the champion.
Only for a little while. Only
Kevin's
keep me by one question.
only the champion for like a week.
War.
See you next time.
War never changes. Fight.
No reward is worth this. Go ahead. Make my day.